My name is Cassidy and I am 33 years old. My husband abandoned me just one day before my due date to go on a luxury vacation with his parents. He threw a $50 bill on the counter as I bent over in agonizing pain. "You will be fine," he said. "Just take a taxi to the hospital. The tickets are non-refundable." I stayed silent. He did not know that by the time his plane landed, his entire wealthy existence would be erased. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to toxic in-laws who underestimated your worth. The harsh metallic zip of a suitcase echoed through our master bedroom. I gripped the edge of the kitchen chair. My knuckles turned white as a brutal contraction ripped through my abdomen. I was 39 weeks pregnant. Sweat beaded on my forehead, and I gasped for air. The pain was blinding, but the emotional reality of the moment was far worse. Liam, my husband of 5 years, did not even look up from his packing. He carefully folded his expensive designer suit and laid it perfectly inside his leather travel bag. He adjusted the cuffs of his tailored shirt and tossed a crumpled $50 bill onto the granite island. "You will be fine," he said casually. "Just take a taxi to the hospital. The tickets to New York are non-refundable." I stared at the money. $50 to cover a ride to the maternity ward while I was about to give birth to his child. His mother, Patricia, stood in the doorway of our bedroom. She tapped her diamond-encrusted watch impatiently. Her pristine blonde hair and perfect makeup made my disheveled state feel even more pathetic in her eyes. "Stop faking cramps to ruin our family vacation, Cassidy," Patricia sneered. "Women give birth every day. It is a completely natural biological process. Do not be so dramatic and selfish just because Liam has important business to attend to. We cannot delay a multi-million-dollar real estate deal just because you are feeling a little discomfort." I squeezed my eyes shut. The physical pain of the contraction was subsiding, but the crushing weight of their contempt remained. This was not a new feeling. For 5 years I had been treated as the unpaid maid of this family. They thought I was just a lowly tax clerk. Just last month, during our Thanksgiving dinner, Liam's sister Rebecca and her husband Jamal had made a sport out of humiliating me. Jamal, a wealthy and arrogant investment banker, had loudly mocked the discount maternity dress I was wearing. He tossed a massive stack of corporate financial records onto my lap right at the dinner table. "Be a good little clerk and run these numbers for me," Jamal had laughed. "You have nothing better to do with your boring government job anyway." He bragged about his Wall Street bonuses while sipping expensive wine. They all constantly handed me their crumpled receipts and demanded I file their corporate taxes for free. They openly mocked my modest lifestyle. Every family dinner was an opportunity for Patricia to remind me that I was a commoner who had lucked into marrying a wealthy heir. Liam never defended me. He was a coward who always hid behind his mother and her money. Liam zipped his bag closed and grabbed the handle. He walked right past me without a second glance. "I am turning my phone off during the flight," he said over his shoulder. "Call my assistant if there is an actual emergency. Do not bother my parents." The heavy oak front door slammed shut. The silence of the massive house pressed in on me immediately. I stood alone in the kitchen, breathing heavily. I did not shed a single tear. The time for crying had passed months ago when I first uncovered the depths of their depravity. I stood up straight, pushing through the lingering ache in my lower back. I grabbed my pre-packed hospital bag with one hand and my phone with the other. I ordered an Uber to the nearest hospital. Then I opened a secure application on my phone and dialed a restricted federal number. Special Agent Miller, speaking, a sharp voice answered on the other end of the line. "This is Senior Forensic Accountant Cassidy." I replied, my voice steady despite another wave of pain beginning to build. "They just left for the airport. They are heading to Manhattan to finalize the purchase." "Understood," Miller said. "We have units standing by in New York." "Are you all right, Cassidy? I hear you're heading to the hospital today." "I am doing exactly what needs to be done," I told him. "Keep your team ready. I will give the final signal when the target funds are moved." I ended the call and walked out the front door. The cool morning air hit my face. My Uber driver pulled into the driveway and rushed out to help me with my bag when he saw my condition. I climbed into the back seat and gave him the address of the hospital. As the car pulled away from the sprawling suburban estate I had shared with Liam, I looked at the $50 bill I still held in my hand. It was the ultimate insult. A meager handout from a man who had stolen millions. For the past 6 months, my assigned task at the Internal Revenue Service was to quietly audit the massive real estate company owned by my father-in-law. They thought I was just a boring clerk pushing papers at a local tax office. They had no idea I was a senior investigator for the federal government, specializing in complex financial crimes. They had no idea that I spent my nights decoding their offshore accounts and tracking their illegal wire transfers. They treated me like an idiot while I built a federal case that would put them all behind bars. The car hit a bump and I cried out as a massive contraction seized my entire body. I clutched my stomach, gripping the leather seat. I was entirely alone, about to bring a new life into the world. The fear tried to creep in, but I pushed it down with pure adrenaline. I had to focus. I had to finish the job. My encrypted work phone buzzed in my hand. The screen lit up with an automated alert from the agency tracking system. The message was clear and concise. The New York penthouse wire transfer is initiating. $10 million is moving from the Cayman accounts. I smiled through the agonizing pain. I wiped the cold sweat from my brow, took a long, deep breath to steady my racing heart, and typed my reply with shaking fingers. Execute the freeze immediately. Let them burn. The automatic doors of the emergency room slid open to welcome a blast of sterile air. I walked heavily toward the triage desk. Every step sent a jolt of fire through my lower spine. The receptionist, a middle-aged woman in faded blue scrubs, looked up from her computer screen. Her eyes scanned my damp forehead, my pale face, and the cheap, oversized maternity shirt I had bought on clearance. She looked past my shoulders, searching for a husband, a boyfriend, a mother, anyone. She found empty space. I saw the pity wash over her features instantly. It was the same pity I had endured from Liam's family for 5 years. "You are here for delivery, sweetie?" she asked, using that slow, sympathetic tone reserved for the unfortunate. "Let us get you a wheelchair. We have a bed opening up in the shared ward on the 2nd floor. It gets a little noisy with the other families, but we will take good care of you." I placed my hands on the high counter to brace myself through another tightening wave of pain. "I am not going to the shared ward," I said, my voice perfectly steady. "I need the maternity penthouse suite, the one on the top floor." The receptionist gave a sad little smile. "Oh, honey, that suite is $5,000 a night out of pocket. Insurance does not cover it. Let us just get you settled in a standard room where you can be comfortable." I did not argue. I did not explain. I simply reached into my hospital bag, unzipped the side pocket, and pulled out a heavy, solid metal card. I placed the exclusive Centurion black card onto the counter. The metal clinked against the hard laminate surface. The heavy, solid metal card gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights. "Run it," I commanded, "and tell the staff I want absolute privacy." The receptionist stared at the card. Her eyes widened to the size of saucers. The pity vanished, replaced entirely by pure shock. She grabbed the card, swiped it through the terminal, and watched as the approval code flashed instantly. Within 2 minutes, a team of nurses was escorting me into a private elevator. They ushered me into a sprawling suite that looked more like a 5-star hotel than a hospital room. It had mahogany finishes, a massive soaking tub, and panoramic views of the city. I laid down on the pristine white bed. The nurses hooked me up to the fetal monitors and left me in peace. The silence of the room was broken only by the rhythmic heartbeat of my baby echoing from the machine. Thump, thump, thump. A steady reminder of what I was fighting for. Then another sound pierced the quiet. My phone buzzed sharply on the nightstand. Then it buzzed again, and again, and again. I reached over and unlocked the screen. It was the family group chat. Liam had clearly forgotten to turn his phone off, or he had simply lied about it. A photo loaded on the screen. It was a selfie taken by Rebecca, my arrogant sister-in-law. She was sipping champagne in a plush first-class leather seat. Liam sat right behind her, looking relaxed and oblivious. Finally, a vacation without the dead weight, Rebecca had typed below the image. It is so nice to travel with people who actually belong in first class. Another message popped up immediately after. This one was from Terrence. He was Rebecca's husband and a notoriously ruthless investment banker on Wall Street. He always made sure everyone knew exactly how much money he managed. "Do not be too hard on Cassidy," Terrence wrote, adding a laughing emoji. "It is not her fault she cannot afford nice things on a pathetic government salary. She is probably taking the bus to a public clinic right now. Stick to your spreadsheets, Cassidy. Leave the luxury to the people who actually earn it. Pathetic government salary. Stick to your spreadsheets. Pathetic government salary. Stick to your spreadsheets." The words echoed in my mind. They repeated over and over, matching the rhythm of the fetal monitor. Thump, thump, thump. Stick to your spreadsheets. They thought my job was a joke. They thought I was a paper pusher analyzing local bakery taxes. They had no idea who I really was. They had no idea what a senior forensic accountant for the federal government was capable of doing. Another contraction hit me like a freight train. My vision blurred, my muscles locked. I breathed through the fire, focusing the agonizing physical pain into pure cold calculation. I reached into my bag and pulled out my encrypted agency laptop. I rested it on my swollen belly and flipped the screen open. I bypassed the standard security protocols and logged directly into the federal database. I brought up the financial routing numbers for Terrence's prestigious Wall Street investment bank. Terrence thought he was a genius. He thought his offshore accounts were invisible. But forensic accounting is just a puzzle, and I had all the pieces. I began cross-referencing Terrence's massive corporate transfers with the shell companies controlled by my father-in-law, Charles. My fingers flew across the keyboard. The pain in my abdomen spiked again. I typed harder. Pain, type, pain, type. I traced a $2 million wire transfer from Charles's real estate firm, disguised as a consulting fee, directly into an account in the Cayman Islands managed by Terrence. It was a textbook money laundering operation. They were cleaning dirty money right under the nose of the federal government. But they made one fatal flaw. They brought a federal investigator into their home and treated her like trash. I compiled the final ledger. I attached the IP addresses, the offshore routing numbers, the fake invoices, and the forged signatures. I packaged the entire dossier into a single encrypted file. The evidence was irrefutable. It was a financial death sentence. I prepared the submission to the federal magistrate for immediate execution. The door to the suite swung open. My obstetrician walked in, flanked by 2 delivery nurses. She took one look at the monitors and then at me. "Put the laptop away, Cassidy," the doctor said, her voice full of urgency. "You are fully dilated. It is time to push right now." I did not close the laptop. I kept my finger hovering over the enter key. The contraction peaked, consuming my entire body in a tidal wave of pressure. "Push, Cassidy," the doctor yelled. I gritted my teeth. I let out a fierce guttural scream. I pushed with every ounce of strength I had left in my body. And as I pushed, I brought my finger down hard on the enter key. The final keystroke. The final push. My baby let out a sharp, piercing cry, filling the room with the sound of new life. I fell back against the pillows, completely exhausted, gasping for air. I turned my head to the side. Through the sweat and tears stinging my eyes, I looked at my laptop screen. A bright, solid green banner flashed across the dark display. Federal warrants approved. The piercing cry of my newborn daughter anchored me to the present. The sheer relief washed over my exhausted body. A nurse gently placed the tiny warm bundle onto my bare chest. I wrapped my arms around her tiny frame, feeling a fierce and immediate surge of protective love. She was perfect. She had 10 tiny fingers and a shock of dark hair. I promised her right then that she would never feel the sting of inadequacy that Liam and his family had tried to force upon me. She would never be treated as an outsider in her own life. The obstetrician offered a warm smile as she finished her work. The room slowly cleared out, leaving just me, my daughter, and a single attending nurse. The nurse approached the side of my bed holding a clipboard and a pen. She had a kind but tired face. "You did incredibly well, Cassidy," she said softly. "We just need to fill out some standard paperwork for the birth certificate. What is the father's full legal name?" I looked down at my sleeping daughter. I thought of Liam boarding a first-class flight to New York while I was writhing in agony. I thought of him tossing a $50 bill on our kitchen counter. I thought of the stolen money he was planning to spend in Manhattan right at this very moment. "Leave it blank," I instructed coldly. The nurse blinked in surprise. Her pen hovered over the paper. "Are you entirely sure?" she asked. "It can be quite a complicated legal process to add the father later on." "He is not going to be added later," I replied, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "He opted out of this child the moment he walked out our front door this morning. Leave the father section blank." The nurse nodded silently and stepped out of the room just as another figure stepped in. It was Marcus, my private attorney. Marcus was a shark in a tailored suit. He had been quietly working for me for the past 4 months, ever since I first noticed the discrepancies in my personal accounts. He walked into the VIP suite, carrying a thick leather briefcase. He glanced at the green banner still glowing brightly on my laptop screen and gave a curt nod of approval. "The federal agents are mobilizing in New York as we speak," Marcus said, pulling a chair up to my bedside. "You timed that perfectly, Cassidy. But we have our own separate civil matters to handle right now." "How are you holding up?" "I have never felt better," I told him, shifting my daughter so she rested securely against my heart. "Tell me you brought the finalized documents." Marcus snapped his briefcase open and pulled out a thick stack of legal papers. He handed me a sleek metal pen. "I have everything right here," he confirmed. "I still cannot believe the sheer arrogance of your in-laws. They genuinely thought you would never check the balances on your grandfather's trust fund." My grandfather had been a brilliant real estate developer in Chicago. When he passed away 3 years ago, he left a massive trust fund intended solely for my firstborn child. It was meant to cover her education, her future, and her security. Liam and his mother Patricia discovered the routing numbers hidden in our home safe. They assumed because I worked a modest government job and drove a 6-year-old sedan that I was completely financially illiterate. They thought I was just a naive tax clerk who would not understand complex wire transfers or offshore shell companies. "They drained $4 million from my daughter's trust fund over the last 6 months," Marcus said, shaking his head in disgust. "They used your own child's future to secure the down payment on that $10 million Manhattan penthouse. Patricia actually forged your signature on the release forms last week. She told the bank manager you were too busy with pregnancy complications to attend the signing in person." I gripped the pen tightly. "They thought they were untouchable," I said. "Patricia genuinely believed that because I grew up in a working-class neighborhood, I would never understand wealth management. She thought I would just blindly trust my husband to handle the family finances. She was completely oblivious to the fact that my daily job involves hunting down multi-million-dollar corporate tax evaders." "They are going to face federal prison time for the wire fraud alone," Marcus stated, handing me the first set of documents. "But here is the petition for sole legal and physical custody of your daughter. Given the impending federal charges and his documented absence during the birth, the judge will grant this immediately. Liam will have absolutely zero parental rights." I did not hesitate. I pressed the pen to the paper and signed my name with sharp, decisive strokes. I signed away his rights to my daughter. I signed away his access to my life. "And here are the divorce papers," Marcus continued, placing the next stack in front of me. "We are filing on the grounds of financial abuse and fraud. We are also freezing his remaining personal assets to recover the stolen trust fund money. He will not be able to buy a cup of coffee, let alone pay for a high-priced defense attorney." I signed the divorce papers. The scratch of the pen against the thick parchment sounded like victory. Every signature severed another chain tying me to their toxic family. I handed the documents back to Marcus. He placed them safely inside his briefcase and stood up. "I will file these with the court the second it opens," Marcus said. Congratulations, Cassidy. You are finally free. You? Marcus quietly left the room. I leaned back against the hospital pillows, holding my beautiful baby girl. The exhaustion of labor finally began to wash over me, but my mind was razor sharp. I watched the large windows of the penthouse suite as the dark night sky slowly began to turn a soft, bruised purple. The morning sun breached the horizon, bathing the city in a golden light. It was a new day, a new life. Suddenly, the silence of the room shattered. My personal phone began to vibrate violently against the nightstand. The screen lit up with an incoming call. The caller ID displayed Liam's name. The flight to New York had landed. I picked up the phone and pressed the green accept button. I brought the speaker to my ear. Cassidy. Liam screamed into the phone. His voice was frantic, breathless, and high-pitched with pure panic. Honey, what is going on? I just tried to pay for our private car service at the airport and my cards are declining. Every single one of them. Even the corporate accounts. What did you do? I looked down at my sleeping daughter. I felt no pity. I felt no remorse. That is the price you pay, I said. Then I hung up the phone. The morning sun poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse suite, casting a warm, golden glow over the hospital bed. I sat in the quiet stillness of the room, rocking my beautiful daughter to sleep. For the first time in 5 years, I felt completely untethered from the heavy, suffocating weight of my husband and his toxic family. My heart was light. My mind was sharp. The silence, however, was strictly physical. On the nightstand, my encrypted phone had been vibrating non-stop for the past hour. The screen was a chaotic waterfall of notifications. I watched the numbers climb with a deep sense of satisfaction. 10 missed calls from Liam, 15 missed calls from Patricia. Dozens of frantic text messages filled the screen. They demanded to know why their bank cards were declining at the hotel concierge. They asked if I had forgotten to pay the premium credit card bills. They ordered me to call the bank and sort out the glitch immediately. They still thought I was just their obedient little clerk. They still thought this was a simple administrative error that I could fix with a quick phone call to customer service. I ignored every single message. I gently burped my baby and adjusted her soft pink swaddle. Then the phone vibrated with a new incoming request. It was a FaceTime call from Terrence. I swiped the green button to accept the video call and propped the phone against my plastic water pitcher. I made sure the camera angle perfectly captured me looking utterly relaxed while holding my newborn. Terrence appeared on the screen. He was pacing furiously in what looked like the opulent marble lobby of a 5-star Manhattan hotel. He wore his tailored designer suit, but his tie was loosened and a visible sheen of sweat coated his forehead. He looked absolutely unhinged. He did not even pause to notice the tiny infant resting against my chest. Listen to me, you petty little paper pusher, Terrence hissed into the camera. I do not know what kind of hormonal meltdown you are having right now, but this is not a game. Every single corporate account is locked. Our personal platinum cards are frozen. The wire transfer for the penthouse bounced, and the seller is threatening to pull the deal entirely. I continued to rock my daughter, my expression completely blank. I let him rant. Did you hack the main portal? Terrence demanded, his voice echoing slightly in the vast hotel lobby. Did you change the master passwords just to get back at us because you are stuck in a hospital bed while we are in New York? You are pathetic, Cassidy. You are a glorified calculator. Call the bank right now and authorize the release of the funds. If you do not fix this technical glitch in the next 5 minutes, I swear to God, I will have my lawyers bury you in so much litigation you will never see the light of day. He pointed his finger directly at the camera lens, as if he could reach through the screen and intimidate me. As he raised his hand, the heavy gold watch on his left wrist caught the light of the crystal lobby chandeliers. It was a spectacular timepiece. I knew exactly what it was. I adjusted my grip on my daughter and leaned closer to the screen. That is a stunning watch, Terrence, I said, my voice dropping to a low, chilling calm. A limited edition Audemars Piguet. Rose gold with the skeleton dial. A beautiful piece of machinery. Terrence paused. His hand froze in midair. He looked at his wrist, and then back at the screen, his brow furrowing in confusion. "What the hell does my watch have to do with you locking our accounts?" he snapped. "Serial number 842917. I continued reciting the digits from memory with absolute precision. "Purchased exactly 4 months ago on a Tuesday afternoon. You did not buy it in New York, though. You routed the purchase through a shell company called Apex Global Consulting. You paid for it using an offshore account based in the Cayman Islands. Account ending in 4409. The exact same account you and Charles have been using to launder untaxed real estate profits for the last 3 years." The color vanished from Terrence's face. The aggressive, arrogant Wall Street banker disappeared in a fraction of a second. He stopped pacing. He stood perfectly still in the middle of the crowded hotel lobby. He stared at the screen as if looking at a ghost. People walking past him with their luggage gave him strange looks, but he did not notice them. "What did you just say?" he whispered, his voice barely audible over the background noise of the hotel. "I did not hack your passwords, Terrence." I told him, my eyes locked onto his through the digital connection. "I did not cause a technical glitch. I initiated a federal asset freeze. Every single dollar you tried to move this morning was flagged by the Internal Revenue Service. You see, my government salary might be pathetic to you, but my security clearance is top tier. I am a senior forensic investigator. I have been auditing your fraudulent corporate ledgers since January. I know about the Caymans. I know about the shell companies. I know about every single stolen dime." He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. His lips trembled. The sheer magnitude of his impending downfall was finally crashing down upon him. He was a financial expert. He knew exactly what a federal asset freeze meant. He knew the money was gone, and he knew the authorities already had the paper trail. How he choked out, gripping the phone with shaking hands. "How could you possibly get federal warrants without us knowing?" I smiled a cold, sharp smile. "Because you never looked at me, Terrence. You never saw anything but a quiet little clerk you could mock and abuse. You handed me your financial records and begged me to hang you with them. So I did. The warrants were signed by a federal judge an hour ago." Terrence looked like he was about to pass out. His breathing became shallow and rapid. He glanced nervously around the lobby as if the walls were suddenly closing in on him. "Cassidy, please." He begged, the arrogance entirely stripped from his tone. "We can make a deal. We can fix this. We are family." Before I could tell him exactly what I thought of his version of family, a new figure stepped into the frame of the video call. The impeccably dressed hotel manager approached Terrence from behind, tapping him gently on the shoulder. "Excuse me, sir," the manager said politely but firmly. Terrence spun around, his eyes wide with terror. The camera perspective swung wildly for a second before steadying. Standing directly behind the hotel manager were two large, stern-faced officers from the New York Police Department. They were not smiling. They had their hands resting casually near their dark utility belts. "Mr. Terrence Blackwell," one of the police officers asked, stepping forward. "We have federal marshals waiting for you outside. You need to come with us right now." 30 minutes before Terrence made that frantic video call from the hotel lobby, the Blackwell family was basking in their own perceived brilliance. They sat at a coveted window table inside one of Manhattan's most exclusive Michelin-starred restaurants. The morning sun reflected off the crystal chandeliers and illuminated the pristine white tablecloths. The family had ordered a breakfast feast fit for royalty. Silver platters of beluga caviar rested next to plates of freshly shaved white truffles over imported quail eggs. 3 empty bottles of vintage champagne already sat chilling in silver ice buckets beside the table. Patricia took a delicate sip from her crystal flute and smiled warmly at her son. $10 million cash, she announced, her voice carrying just enough to ensure the wealthy patrons at the adjacent tables could hear her. "The penthouse is completely ours, Liam. It has private elevator access, a wraparound terrace facing Central Park, and enough space to finally host proper social events without bringing those dreadful suburban neighbors into the mix." Terrence leaned back against the plush leather booth and casually adjusted the cuffs of his tailored suit. He flashed a brilliant, arrogant smile. "You should be thanking me, Patricia." Moving $10 million in pure liquid cash without triggering a single federal tax alarm is not exactly child's play. I had to route the funds through 3 different shell companies in the Cayman Islands layer, the transactions as consulting fees, and wash it all through the corporate real estate accounts. The IRS does not even know that money exists. It is completely invisible. Rebecca, who was busy taking photos of her caviar for social media, laughed a sharp, cruel sound. "It is a good thing we left the dead weight back in the suburbs," she chimed in. "Can you imagine Cassidy sitting in a place like this? She would probably ask the waiter for ketchup and a discount menu. She is probably taking a public bus to some overcrowded county hospital right now." Liam scoffed and took a large bite of his truffle eggs. "Do not remind me," he groaned. "You have no idea how exhausting it has been pretending to care about her discount maternity clothes and her boring stories about the local tax office. 5 years of my life wasted acting like the devoted husband to a woman who thinks a luxury vacation means a weekend road trip to a state park." Patricia reached across the table and patted Liam on the hand. Her diamond rings sparkled in the morning light. "It was a necessary sacrifice, darling," Patricia purred. "We needed a cover, and Cassidy was the perfect choice. I specifically chose her for you because she was completely docile and incredibly naive. She came from a working-class background with absolutely no understanding of real generational wealth. I knew a girl like her would be so grateful to marry into our family that she would never dare to ask questions about our business operations. Having a lowly government tax clerk as a daughter-in-law was the ultimate camouflage. No one would ever suspect us of financial crimes while you were married to a woman who clips grocery coupons. I never loved her for a single second," Liam admitted, pouring himself another glass of champagne. "But she played her part. She kept the house clean, she stayed out of my way, and she provided the perfect boring facade. The moment this penthouse deal is finalized and the offshore accounts are fully secured, I am filing for divorce. I will give her a tiny settlement to keep her quiet, and we will never have to deal with her pathetic existence again." The family clinked their crystal glasses together in a toast to their own perceived genius. They were entirely oblivious to the fact that the woman they were mocking had already orchestrated their total destruction. A discreet waiter in a perfectly pressed tuxedo approached the table. He carried a silver tray holding a small black leather folder. He placed it gently near Liam's elbow. "Your bill for the morning, sir," the waiter said with a polite bow. Liam did not even look at the total. He knew it was easily over $3,000. He casually reached into his designer wallet, pulled out his heavy platinum corporate card, and tossed it onto the silver tray. "Put an extra 20% on there for yourself," he told the waiter with a dismissive wave of his hand. The waiter nodded, retrieved the tray, and disappeared toward the front desk. The family resumed their arrogant banter, discussing which luxury car they would purchase next to keep in the city. 5 minutes later, the waiter returned. He did not look polite anymore. He looked deeply uncomfortable. "I apologize, sir," the waiter said, leaning in closely to keep his voice down, "but your card has been declined." Liam stopped mid-sentence, his brow furrowed in annoyance. "Declined? That is impossible. It is a corporate account with an unlimited ceiling. Run it again. Your machine must be broken. I have run it 3 times, sir," the waiter replied, maintaining his professional composure. "The terminal specifically states the transaction is blocked." Patricia rolled her eyes and let out a dramatic sigh. "Honestly, Liam, you probably forgot to alert the fraud department that we were traveling to New York. You are so careless sometimes." She opened her own diamond-studded handbag and pulled out her exclusive wealth management card. She dropped it onto the tray with a sharp clack. "Use this one," Patricia demanded, "and be quick about it. We have a penthouse to close on." The waiter took Patricia's card and hurried away. The tension at the table spiked slightly, but Terrence just chuckled. "Fraud protection is a nightmare for high-net-worth individuals," he stated, tapping the face of his rose-gold Audemars Piguet watch. "The banks are overly cautious when you move the kind of money we do." The waiter returned faster this time. He was no longer alone. The general manager of the restaurant walked beside him. The manager held both Liam's and Patricia's cards in his hand. His expression was incredibly grave. "I am deeply sorry, madam," the manager said, addressing Patricia, But your card has also been declined. Patricia slammed her hands flat against the table, causing the silverware to rattle. This is absolutely outrageous, she hissed. Do you know who we are? I demand you call our bank immediately. This is a simple mistake and you are embarrassing us. Terrence let out a loud, irritated groan. He stood up from the booth, determined to assert his dominance and fix the situation. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his heavy, solid metal black card. It was the ultimate symbol of elite financial status. Enough of this incompetence, Terrence snapped, shoving the black card directly into the manager's chest. Take this. There is no limit. Charge the entire breakfast to my account and bring me the receipt right now so we can leave this ridiculous establishment. The manager took the black card, but he did not walk away to run it. He stood perfectly still. He looked down at the 3 cards in his hand and then looked directly into Terrence's eyes. The dining room around them had grown eerily quiet. The wealthy patrons at the neighboring tables had stopped eating and were now staring openly at the unfolding scene. "Sir, I cannot run this card," the manager stated, his voice echoing clearly across the hushed dining room. "And why exactly not?" Terrence demanded, his face flushing with furious anger. "Because, sir, your bank instructed us to confiscate these cards under federal orders." Terrence snatched his hand back as if the solid metal card had suddenly caught fire. The deafening silence in the Michelin-starred restaurant was broken only by the quiet gasps of the wealthy patrons at the surrounding tables. Patricia's face lost all its color, her smug superiority draining away to leave behind a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. Liam darted his eyes wildly toward the exit, his expensive designer suit suddenly looking like a prison uniform. "This is an absolute outrage," Patricia hissed, keeping her voice low but frantic. "We are leaving this instant." They scrambled out of the dining room, leaving their untouched caviar and vintage champagne behind. They practically ran through the opulent corridors until they reached the expansive marble lobby of the hotel. Terrence was sweating profusely, his fingers trembling as he pulled out his phone. He initiated the furious FaceTime call to me, pacing the lobby and demanding answers, which led to the exact moment the hotel manager and the NYPD officers approached him from behind. As the officers stepped into the frame, Terrence dropped his phone onto the marble concierge desk in sheer panic. The camera angle shifted, pointing up at the ornate ceiling, but I could clearly see Patricia shoving her way into the picture. Her pristine composure was completely shattered. She pushed Terrence aside, snatching the phone and holding it close to her panicked face. "Cassidy, what kind of sick joke is this?" Patricia demanded, her voice shrill and echoing off the polished stone walls. People in the lobby were stopping to stare. "Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? We are standing in the middle of Manhattan being harassed by local police. Call whoever you need to call at your little tax office and fix this glitch right now. Tell them who we are. Tell them to release our funds immediately, or I swear I will make sure you never work in this state again." I shifted my weight against the hospital pillows, bringing my newborn daughter closer to my chest. The chaotic noise of the lobby blared through my phone speaker, contrasting beautifully with the absolute peace of my recovery suite. "I did not freeze your cards, Patricia," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. "The IRS did." Patricia blinked her perfectly manicured eyebrows, drawing together in confusion. "The IRS? What are you talking about?" "You are a junior processing clerk. You do not have the authority to trigger a federal freeze on accounts of our magnitude." I dropped the mask I had been wearing for 5 long years. The obedient, naive, working-class girl vanished. "I am not a junior clerk, Patricia," I stated clearly, letting the full weight of my actual title sink in. "I am a senior forensic accountant for the federal government. My entire division specializes in dismantling complex corporate fraud and international money laundering rings, and for the past 6 months, I have been systematically tearing apart your real estate empire's fraudulent books line by line." The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. Even through the screen, I could see the physical impact of my words. The reality of her situation was finally crashing through her thick layers of arrogance. "You thought you were so clever," I continued, not giving her a chance to catch her breath. "You thought because I bought my clothes on clearance and drove a practical car, I lacked the intelligence to understand your financial structures. You paraded your stolen wealth in front of me every single day. Terrence bragged about moving millions through the Caymans at family dinners. Jamal handed me raw, corporate data to file your taxes for free, basically handing me the exact evidence I needed to map your entire laundering network. You gave the federal government a front-row seat to your own criminal enterprise because you were too elitist to believe a working-class girl could outsmart you. Liam suddenly shoved his mother out of the way. His face filled the screen. He was sweating profusely, his expensive tie hanging askew. He looked over his shoulder at the officers, then back at me. He was crying. Actual tears streamed down his face, ruining his perfectly groomed appearance. "Cassidy, please." Liam begged, his voice cracking. "You cannot do this. You are my wife. We are your family. You know I love you. We can work this out privately. Just call your director and tell them it is a mistake. Tell them you made an error in your audit. You cannot send your own family to federal prison." "My family," I repeated. The word tasted bitter on my tongue. I thought about the Thanksgiving dinners where they openly mocked my background. I thought about the countless times Liam stood by silently while his mother tore me down. I thought about the moment my water broke and he casually tossed a $50 bill on the counter before walking out the door to go on a luxury vacation. I angled the camera down slightly, bringing my sleeping daughter into the frame. She was wrapped in a soft white hospital blanket, her tiny chest rising and falling peacefully. Liam stared at the screen. His eyes widened as he registered the newborn baby resting in my arms. He had been so consumed by his own financial panic that he had not even realized I had already given birth to his child. "Look at her, Liam," I commanded. "Look at the daughter you abandoned today, Cassidy." "I am so sorry," he sobbed, reaching toward the screen as if he could somehow touch us. "I will come back right now. I will be a good father. Just please call off the marshals." I looked at the man I had once loved and felt absolutely nothing. "My grandfather worked his entire life to build a legitimate business," I said, my voice turning to ice. "He left a trust fund to ensure this little girl would always be safe and secure. You and your mother thought I was too financially illiterate to notice when you secretly drained her accounts. You stole my daughter's future to buy a penthouse you did not earn. Cassidy, please," Liam pleaded one last time, dropping to his knees in the middle of the hotel lobby. "You stopped being family yesterday," I said. I reached forward and pressed the red button. The screen went dark, cutting off his desperate cries. I set the phone face down on the nightstand and wrapped both arms around my daughter. The morning sun streamed through the penthouse windows, washing over us in a warm, protective glow. My job was done. The criminals were in custody. The stolen funds were frozen, and the toxic weight of his family was finally gone from my life forever. I kissed the top of my baby's head, knowing her future was safe, and for the first time in 5 years, I was truly, completely free. The silence that followed Rebecca's hysterical confession was absolute and suffocating. The lead Internal Revenue Service agent, a tall woman with steel gray hair and a thick clipboard, did not even blink. She simply raised her pen and made a precise, deliberate checkmark next to a line of text. Terrence stared at his wife in pure horror. The realization that she had just openly admitted to federal wire fraud in a room full of federal agents completely shattered his remaining composure. His Wall Street bravado evaporated in an instant, leaving behind a cornered, desperate man. He looked at the agents moving through the penthouse, boxing up hard drives and financial ledgers. He knew his life as a wealthy, untouchable banker was over. "It was not my idea," Terrence shouted, his voice cracking as he backed away from Rebecca and pointed a shaking finger directly at Liam. "I just moved the money. I was following orders. Richard orchestrated the entire thing. My father-in-law set up the shell companies and told me exactly where to route the funds. I am just a consultant. I am a victim of their family corruption." Liam clutched his head, stepping back as if he had been physically struck. "You coward, Liam!" yelled, his face red with a mix of betrayal and terror. "You are selling out my father to save your own skin. You bragged about this operation every single day." Terrence ignored him, turning back to the federal agents with his hands raised in surrender. "I will give you everything on Richard Blackwell," he pleaded. I will give you the server access, the offshore routing numbers, the Cayman Island accounts. Just give me immunity. The lead agent stepped forward, her expression clinical and entirely devoid of sympathy. We already have the Cayman Island accounts, Mr. Blackwell, she stated smoothly, flipping a page on her clipboard. But since you brought them up, perhaps you can clarify a specific discrepancy. We tracked a recurring wire transfer totaling exactly $2 million routed through the Apex Global Shell Company. It bypassed the family trust entirely and was deposited into a private offshore holding account. Rebecca let out a sharp scoff, attempting to regain some shred of her shattered dignity. She smoothed the front of her designer dress and glared at the agent. "That is our private reserve capital," she sneered. "My husband is a brilliant investor. We keep a diversified portfolio for emergencies. There is nothing illegal about maintaining a private family nest egg." The agent looked at Rebecca with a chilling mix of pity and professional detachment. "That account is not registered to your family trust." "Mrs. Blackwell?" the agent replied, her voice carrying clearly across the grand living room. "It is registered to a private residence in South Beach, Miami, under the name of a Miss Chloe Kensington. According to the financial disclosures and the corresponding flight logs, your husband has been funding her luxury condo and personal expenses for the last 4 years." The air in the room seemed to vanish. Rebecca turned her head slowly to look at Terrence. Her eyes were wide, the arrogant smirk completely wiped from her face. Terrence took a step back, his face draining of all color. He opened his mouth to speak, to formulate one of his slick corporate lies, but no sound came out. "You told me those business trips to Miami were for client acquisitions," Rebecca whispered, her voice vibrating with a dangerous feral energy. "You took my family's stolen money and gave it to a mistress," Rebecca snapped. The pristine image-obsessed socialite vanished entirely, replaced by a woman consumed by blind, violent rage. She lunged at Terrence with a guttural scream, her manicured hands clawing directly at his face. She grabbed his expensive silk tie and yanked him downward, scratching violently at his cheeks and tearing the lapel of his custom suit. Terrence shouted in pain, throwing his arms up to protect his face. He stumbled backward, crashing into a stack of empty cardboard boxes. Rebecca was relentless, kicking and swinging wildly. Liam, already panicking and overwhelmed by the escalating disaster, rushed forward to intervene. "Get off him, Rebecca!" Liam yelled, grabbing his sister-in-law by the shoulders and trying to drag her backward. Terrence, blinded by panic and trying to break free, swung his fist blindly. His knuckles collided squarely with Liam's jaw with a sickening crunch. Liam stumbled backwards, his arms flailing as he crashed hard into a heavy mahogany console table, sending a priceless crystal vase shattering into 1,000 pieces across the hardwood floor. The New York Police Department officers moved in instantly. They tackled Terrence to the ground, pressing his face against the polished floorboards while twisting his arms behind his back. The sharp metallic click of handcuffs echoed through the penthouse. 2 other officers pulled a screaming, thrashing Rebecca away, pinning her against the wall to secure her wrists. Liam groaned on the floor, clutching his bleeding jaw, as an officer hauled him to his feet and cuffed him. Patricia stood frozen in the center of the room. She watched her perfect, wealthy, aristocratic family degenerate into a violent, screaming mob of criminals. The heavy double doors of the penthouse had been propped open by the agents. The commotion had drawn a crowd. The ultra-wealthy residents of the exclusive building, prominent CEOs, celebrities, and old money heirs, were standing in the hallway, watching the spectacle with wide eyes and hushed whispers. Patricia locked eyes with a famous socialite from her country club who was peering through the doorway with a hand over her mouth. The sheer, absolute humiliation was too much to bear. Her carefully constructed world of superiority and privilege was being dismantled on a public stage. Her breath caught in her throat. Her eyes rolled back into her head, and Patricia fainted dead away, collapsing onto the cold marble entry floor. When Patricia finally opened her eyes, the marble and crystal of the luxury high-rise were gone. She was sitting on a cold metal bench in a sterile, brightly lit holding cell at the local police precinct. The smell of cheap bleach and stale sweat assaulted her senses. Her designer dress was wrinkled and her wrists throbbed from the tight metal cuffs. She marched up to the metal bars and demanded her rights from the desk sergeant with all the aristocratic authority she could muster. She was granted her one legally mandated phone call. Patricia dialed the private number of her elite real estate attorney based in Seattle, the man who managed the family's oldest and most secure assets. She gripped the heavy plastic receiver, her knuckles turning white. Arthur, she barked into the phone the second the line connected. This is an absolute catastrophe. We have been wrongfully detained due to some ridiculous misunderstanding with the tax office. I need you to initiate an immediate liquidation. Put the primary family mansion on the market today. Sell it below market value if you have to. I do not care. I need you to wire the cash to post bail for Liam and myself this instant. There was a long, heavy pause on the other end of the line. When the lawyer finally spoke, his voice was trembling with a mixture of fear and profound discomfort. Patricia. He said his words slow and measured. I cannot do that. You do not own the mansion anymore. Exactly 7 days before the Michelin restaurant disaster, I sat in the dim glow of my dual monitors in my cramped home office. My heavily pregnant belly pressed uncomfortably against the edge of the cheap particle board desk, but I barely noticed the physical discomfort. I was too completely consumed by the financial data scrolling across my screens. I had finally traced the ultimate thread of Richard's panicked financial maneuvering. The patriarch of the family, the man who always looked down his nose at my lack of pedigree, had made a fatal, sloppy miscalculation. Desperate for immediate liquidity to cover a massive, sudden shortfall in his offshore laundering network, he had quietly leveraged the crown jewel of their empire. He took out an unregulated, illegal loan against the sprawling, historic Seattle mansion. It was a desperate move kept entirely off the official books. But the interest rates were predatory, and Richard had unsurprisingly defaulted. The private lender was quietly preparing to foreclose, aiming to seize the property without triggering a public scandal that would alert federal regulators. I smiled at the screen, my fingers flying across the keyboard. Over the past 5 years, while playing the role of the naive, obedient working-class wife, I had been quietly building my own legitimate fortune. Aside from my federal salary, my specialized forensic consulting for private European firms had netted me substantial legally earned savings. I did not hesitate for a single second. Operating through an untraceable, blind LLC, I contacted the private lender and bought the debt outright for pennies on the dollar. The transaction cleared instantly. I owned the paper. I owned the foreclosure rights. I legally owned the mansion. The sterile smell of the hospital faded as the automatic sliding doors parted. The crisp morning air hit my face, bringing a rush of absolute clarity. I held my newborn daughter tightly against my chest, wrapped securely in her soft pink blanket. A sleek black town car was idling at the curb, a sharp contrast to the practical economy sedan I had driven for the entirety of my marriage. The driver tipped his cap and opened the rear door for us. I settled into the plush leather seat, breathing in the scent of fresh upholstery and total freedom. "Where to, ma'am?" the driver asked, adjusting the rearview mirror. "Take us to the primary Blackwell estate," I instructed, my voice steady and commanding. I had no intention of returning to the cramped, modest townhouse Liam and I had shared. That house was a prop, a necessary stage piece for my undercover life. I was going home to the mansion they had flaunted over my head for half a decade. The drive up the winding private road took 40 minutes. The imposing wrought iron gates of the Seattle estate loomed ahead, towering like a fortress. The driver rolled down the window and pressed the intercom button. When the confused, hesitant voice of the estate manager crackled through the speaker, I leaned forward so my voice would carry. "Open the gates, Henry," I commanded. The heavy metal doors swung open, revealing the sweeping manicured lawns and the grand stone facade of the historic mansion. As the car pulled up to the circular driveway, I could see the staff already gathering on the front steps. They looked bewildered and terrified, whispering frantically among themselves. They had undoubtedly seen the explosive morning news reports regarding the federal raid in Manhattan. They knew their employers were in federal custody, but they had no idea who was currently stepping out of the tinted town car. I stepped onto the driveway, holding my daughter securely. Henry, the long-serving estate manager, rushed forward, his face pale and lined with intense stress. "Miss Cassidy," he stammered, stopping a few feet away. We have been trying to reach Mr. Richard or Mrs. Patricia all morning. The news is saying they were arrested in New York. We do not know what to do about the property." I walked right past him, straight up the grand stone steps, and pushed open the massive oak front doors. The opulent foyer with its sweeping dual staircase and imported crystal chandelier looked exactly as arrogant and excessive as it always did. "You do not need to reach them, Henry," I said, turning to face the anxious staff who had followed me inside. "They are not coming back, and neither is Liam." I reached into my designer diaper bag and pulled out a thick manila folder. I handed it directly to Henry. He opened it hesitantly, his eyes scanning the heavily stamped legal documents. "Those are the official foreclosure and eviction notices," I announced, my voice echoing off the marble walls. "Richard Blackwell defaulted on a predatory loan secured against this estate. My private LLC purchased the debt last week. I am the sole legal owner of this property as of yesterday morning. The Blackwell family has been formally and legally evicted." Henry stared at the papers, his mouth opening and closing in sheer shock. The rest of the staff gasped audibly. "Here are your new instructions," I continued, projecting absolute authority. "First, call a locksmith immediately. I want every single exterior door and secure access point changed within the hour. Disable all previous alarm codes and biometric scans. Second, take a team upstairs to the master suite and the guest wing. I want every single item belonging to Liam, Patricia, and Richard packed up immediately." Henry swallowed hard, nodding frantically. "Should we order moving boxes, ma'am?" "No," I replied sharply, my tone leaving no room for debate. "Use the heavy-duty black garbage bags from the landscaping shed. Stuff their custom suits, their imported Italian shoes, and Patricia's expensive jewelry boxes into the trash bags. When you are done, drag them outside and dump them at the bottom of the driveway near the main gate. If anyone from their legal team wants to collect their belongings, they can pick it up from the curb like common garbage." The staff scattered instantly, moving with a sudden, terrified efficiency. I stood in the center of the massive foyer, looking up at the vaulted ceiling. The air already felt incredibly lighter without their toxic presence suffocating the space. I looked down at my daughter, who was sleeping peacefully, completely oblivious to the empire I had just conquered for her. The deep rumble of a heavy diesel engine broke the quiet morning air. I walked back out onto the front steps to see a massive commercial moving truck rolling through the open wrought iron gates. It parked right behind my town car, the air brakes hissing loudly. Henry peeked his head out the front door, looking highly confused. "Are those your things arriving, ma'am?" I smiled a cold, calculating smile as a crew of burly men in matching uniforms jumped out of the truck and began lowering the heavy metal ramp. "No, Henry," I replied, keeping my eyes fixed on the moving truck. "I am not moving my things in yet. I am having this crew gut the house entirely. I want every piece of antique furniture, every pretentious family portrait, and every single shred of the Blackwell legacy removed from these walls and sent to a public auction. By sunset, there will be absolutely no proof that their family ever existed here." The FaceTime screen went black, cutting off Liam's desperate pleading. But the nightmare for the Blackwell family had only just begun. Panic instantly replaced arrogance in the opulent hotel lobby. Patricia clutched her designer purse, her breath coming in short, ragged gasps, while Liam stared blankly at his phone, unable to process the absolute destruction of his reality. Terrence grabbed his father Richard by the arm. His Wall Street survival instincts kicked in, overriding his shock. "The offshore accounts are frozen, but we still have the physical assets." Terrence hissed, his eyes darting around the lobby to see if the police had followed them inside. "The emergency safe in the new penthouse. We have $2 million in untraceable cash and the conflict diamonds. We need to get there right now before the feds figure out where it is." Richard, the usually unflappable patriarch, looked visibly aged. His face was gray and his hands trembled as he nodded. Rebecca, Terrence's wife, grabbed her husband's sleeve, her perfectly manicured nails digging into his expensive suit. "Are you absolutely sure the safe is secure?" she demanded, her voice shrill with terror. Terrence nodded frantically, pulling her toward the exit. "I set up the biometric locks myself." Only our fingerprints can open it. We grab the cash we get to the private airstrip, and we disappear. They sprinted out of the hotel, abandoning all pretense of high society dignity. The wealthy elite who usually glided through Manhattan were now running like common criminals down the busy sidewalks. Patricia struggled to keep up in her stiletto heels, while Liam trailed behind them looking like a ghost. They pushed past tourists and ignored the angry shouts of pedestrians driven purely by the desperate need to reach their newly purchased luxury penthouse. They reached the exclusive glass and steel high-rise, sweating and gasping for air. Terrence shoved his way past the bewildered doorman and practically threw his family into the private express elevator. He swiped his key fob and pressed the button for the top floor. The quiet hum of the elevator ascending felt like a ticking time bomb. The digital display climbed higher and higher, counting down the floors to their salvation. We get in, we empty the vault, and we leave, Richard instructed, wiping sweat from his forehead. No packing bags, no taking jewelry, just the cash and the diamonds. The elevator chimed softly. The polished steel doors slid open, leading directly into the grand foyer of their sprawling Manhattan penthouse. Terrence stepped forward, ready to rush toward the master bedroom. He froze. The penthouse was not empty. The pristine, modern sanctuary was crawling with people. Men and women wearing dark windbreakers with the bright yellow letters IRS Criminal Investigation printed across the back were systematically dismantling their lives. Every drawer was pulled open. Every custom cabinet had been emptied. The expensive modern art had been pulled off the walls, and federal agents were casually tossing stacks of highly classified financial ledgers into standard cardboard boxes. The heavy titanium door of the supposedly impenetrable biometric safe had been completely removed from its hinges, resting casually against a velvet sofa. The safe was completely empty. "What is the meaning of this?" Richard bellowed, stepping out of the elevator and puffing out his chest in a desperate attempt to assert dominance. "You are trespassing on private property. I demand to see a warrant immediately." A tall, imposing IRS agent stepped forward from the center of the living room. She did not look intimidated in the slightest. She calmly pulled a thick, heavily stamped document from her clipboard and pressed it directly against Richard's chest, forcing him to take it. "Richard Blackwell," the agent stated, her voice ringing with absolute authority. "You are being served with a federal subpoena for massive tax evasion, racketeering, and international wire fraud. This property was purchased with illicit funds and has been officially seized by the federal government." Terrence pushed his way forward, his Wall Street arrogance flaring up like a dying flame. "You cannot do this," he shouted, pointing a trembling finger at the agent. "Do you have any idea who you are dealing with? I am a senior managing partner at one of the most powerful financial firms on Wall Street. You are violating my civil rights. I will have my firm's legal team bury you in so much litigation you will never see the inside of a courtroom again. I demand you leave this premises instantly." The lead agent did not even blink. She slowly lowered her clipboard and looked Terrence up and down with an expression of pure, unadulterated pity. "You might want to check your email, Terrence," the agent replied, her tone dangerously calm. "Your firm terminated your employment exactly 1 hour ago. The moment the federal freeze hit your accounts, their compliance division flagged your internal routing numbers. You are heavily implicated in orchestrating the wire fraud. Your firm is cooperating fully with our investigation to save themselves. You have absolutely no legal backing, and you have no high-powered firm to hide behind. You are entirely on your own." The words hit Terrence like a physical blow. His jaw dropped and he stumbled backward, hitting the polished steel frame of the elevator doors. His high-powered career, his status, his entire identity had been wiped out in 60 minutes. Rebecca stood frozen beside him. She looked at the empty safe, then at the federal agents boxing up their lives, and finally at her husband. Her face twisted into a mask of absolute horror and furious realization. The lavish lifestyle, the private jets, the million-dollar shopping sprees were all crashing down around her. "You promised me!" Rebecca shrieked, her voice echoing violently through the gutted penthouse. She grabbed Terrence by the lapels of his ruined suit, shaking him with a sudden, frantic strength. "You told me the Cayman Island transfers were secure. You swore to me that routing the money through the shell companies made it untraceable. You said the IRS would never find the offshore accounts. Terrence's eyes widened in sheer panic. He tried to clamp his hand over his wife's mouth, but it was too late. The lead IRS agent smiled a cold, predatory smile and clicked her pen. "Thank you for the verbal confirmation, Mrs. Blackwell," the agent said, signaling to the armed officers standing by the door. "We already had the paper trail, but an unsolicited confession of international money laundering certainly expedites the process." Officers placed them all under arrest. The battered yellow taxi sputtered exhaust fumes into the crisp Seattle air before speeding away down the street, leaving the disgraced Blackwell family standing on the curb. Patricia marched directly to the heavy wrought iron gates of the estate. She grabbed the cold metal bars and shook them, but the imposing structure did not budge an inch. Her designer suit was hopelessly wrinkled from the agonizing 6-hour economy flight, and her carefully styled hair was plastered to her forehead with nervous sweat. She slammed the palm of her hand against the brass intercom panel, pressing the call button repeatedly. "Open this gate immediately!" she shrieked, her voice cracking with pure hysteria. "Henry, open this gate! We have had an absolute nightmare of a day, and I demand you let us into our home right this second." A brief, sharp burst of static crackled through the high-definition speaker. When the voice finally answered, it was not the estate manager. It was perfectly calm, devoid of any emotion, and completely in control. "State your business." Patricia froze her hand, hovering over the button. Liam, who was leaning against his cheap luggage, with his head in his hands, snapped his head up. Terrence and Rebecca exchanged terrified, exhausted glances. "Cassidy." Patricia spat the name out like poison. "What is the meaning of this? Have you lost your mind? Open the gate this instant. You are a guest in this family, and I will not tolerate this insolence. I am ordering you to let me into my house." "You are mistaken," Cassidy replied, her voice ringing clearly through the crisp outdoor air. "This is no longer the Blackwell estate. This property is owned by a private holdings company, a company of which I am the sole proprietor. You are currently loitering on private property. I strongly suggest you step away from the gate before I call the local authorities and have you removed for trespassing." Patricia let out a guttural scream of absolute rage. She kicked the iron gate with the toe of her expensive leather shoe. "You lying, ungrateful little thief," she yelled, her voice echoing violently down the exclusive tree-lined street. "You stole our home." The commotion was impossible to ignore. The sprawling estates of the neighborhood belonged to tech billionaires, shipping magnates, and old money aristocrats. The heavy wooden doors of the neighboring properties began to open. Prominent socialites and powerful CEOs stepped out onto their manicured lawns, drawn by the spectacle of the untouchable Patricia Blackwell screaming like a madwoman on the sidewalk. Eleanor Vance, a prominent socialite who sat on 3 charity boards with Patricia, paused her morning walk with her purebred spaniel. She stood on the sidewalk just a few yards away, watching the scene with wide, astonished eyes. Patricia spotted her instantly. Her lifelong instinct for manipulation kicked in. She dropped her hands from the gate and instantly arranged her face into a mask of devastated victimhood. She rushed toward Eleanor, tears streaming down her face. "Eleanor! Thank God you are here," Patricia cried out, pointing a trembling finger toward the imposing iron gates. "You have to help us. My deranged daughter-in-law has suffered a complete psychological break." She locked the staff out, changed the security codes, and barricaded herself inside. "She is holding my newborn granddaughter hostage. We are terrified for the baby's safety. She has gone completely insane." Eleanor looked alarmed, taking a step forward to comfort the weeping woman. But before she could speak, the heavy oak front doors of the mansion swung wide open. Every eye on the street turned toward the grand entrance. Cassidy stepped out onto the wide stone porch. She did not look like the quiet, submissive working-class girl Liam had married. She looked immaculate. She wore a tailored ivory power suit that radiated absolute authority, and her posture was unyielding. In her arms, she held her newborn daughter, swaddled safely in a pristine cashmere blanket. She walked deliberately down the long, sweeping driveway, her heels clicking rhythmically against the pavement, until she stopped just inches from the other side of the iron gate. Patricia sneered, her tearful facade vanishing the second she saw Cassidy looking so powerful. "You look absurd," Patricia hissed, gripping the bars. "Give me my granddaughter and pack your cheap bags. I will have my lawyers tear that fraudulent LLC apart by nightfall." Cassidy did not raise her voice. She did not even blink. She simply pulled her smartphone from her pocket and tapped the screen. She had synced her device directly to the estate's high-end outdoor security speakers. "I think your friends and neighbors should hear exactly how much you care about this child," Cassidy said. She pressed play. The audio recording blared through the exterior speakers, echoing across the manicured lawns and bouncing off the surrounding mansions. The sound quality was crystal clear. It was the exact conversation Patricia and Liam had shared in the hospital waiting room while Cassidy was in labor. Patricia's recorded voice dripped with cold calculation. "Leave her there, Liam. The moment the baby is registered and the birth certificate is signed, we move the trust funds directly to the Cayman accounts. She is just a working-class incubator. Let her rot in that public hospital. We take the child, we take the money, and we leave her with absolutely nothing." Then Liam's voice chimed in, perfectly clear and dripping with eager compliance. "You are right, Mother. The money is what matters. I will serve her with the divorce papers the second the transfer clears. She is entirely dependent on us anyway. She will not have a dime to fight us in court." The recording clicked off. The silence that fell over the street was absolute and suffocating. Patricia stood frozen, her face entirely drained of color. She slowly turned her head to look at Eleanor Vance. Eleanor's expression of polite concern had morphed into a look of profound physical disgust. She pulled her dog's leash, tightly backing away from Patricia, as if the woman was carrying a highly contagious disease. The other neighbors, watching from their lawns, shook their heads in absolute revulsion. They turned their backs in unison, retreating into their homes and shutting their heavy doors. In 60 seconds, Patricia's entire social standing, her reputation, and her carefully crafted aristocratic image were completely incinerated. Liam stood paralyzed on the sidewalk. The reality of the recording, combined with the horrific memories of his 6-hour economy flight, completely shattered his mind. During that agonizing journey, trapped in a tiny middle seat, he had remembered how Cassidy had always quietly handled the finances. She was the one who paid the bills when his investments failed. She was the one who balanced the budgets and kept them afloat when his big corporate deals went sideways. He realized in a sickening wave of clarity that he had never been the provider. He had been utterly, fundamentally dependent on her the entire time. Now his inherited wealth was seized by the federal government, his family was facing prison, and the woman he had plotted to destroy was holding his child behind an impenetrable fortress. Liam's legs gave out. He collapsed onto the cold, wet pavement. He crawled forward, dragging his ruined suit against the concrete. He pressed his face against the cold metal, his hands gripping the iron gate so tightly, his knuckles turned white. "Cassidy? Please?" Liam sobbed, tears of absolute despair streaming down his face. "Please, do not do this. I have nothing left. Just let me see her. Please let me see my daughter." Cassidy stared down at the man kneeling on the wet pavement. Liam Blackwell, the heir to a fortune that no longer existed, was weeping like a frightened child. He pressed his face against the cold, wrought iron bars, his fingers gripping the metal so tightly his knuckles turned a stark white. The morning mist had begun to settle, dampening his ruined designer suit and mixing with the tears streaming down his face. He looked absolutely pathetic. Cassidy did not feel an ounce of pity. She adjusted the soft cashmere blanket around her sleeping daughter and took a deliberate step closer to the gate. Her face was an impenetrable mask of absolute calm. She reached into her tailored ivory blazer and pulled out a thick, heavy manila envelope. She crouched slightly, keeping a safe distance from the iron bars, and slid the envelope through the narrow gap at the bottom of the gate. It hit the concrete right in front of Liam's knees with a dull, heavy thud. Liam stared down at it, his breathing ragged. "What is this?" He choked out, his voice raw and shaking. "That is the end of your free ride," Cassidy stated, her voice carrying the chill of the Seattle morning air. "Inside, you will find the finalized divorce papers. I have already signed my portion. You will also find a permanent restraining order granted by a federal judge. You are legally forbidden from coming within 500 feet of me or my daughter ever again." Liam scrambled backward as if the envelope had suddenly caught fire. No, Cassidy, please, you cannot do this. I am her father. We can fix this. You are a biological donor who plotted to steal her future, Cassidy corrected sharply, her eyes narrowing. But there is one more item in that envelope, Liam. You might want to review it before your high-priced defense lawyer does. It is a complete forensic audit of the Apex Global Shell Company. Patricia, who had been standing frozen in shock, suddenly gasped, taking a step back. Liam snapped his head up, his eyes wide with a brand new kind of terror. Every single fraudulent wire transfer you authorized, Cassidy continued, her tone conversational but lethal. Every Cayman Island routing number you tried to hide from the feds. Every document you forged while you thought I was just blindly paying the utility bills and balancing your checkbook. I tracked your IP addresses, I logged your offshore logins, and I handed the entire unredacted file over to the Internal Revenue Service yesterday morning. That audit guarantees your prison sentence, Liam. You are going away for a very long time. Liam broke entirely. The last remaining shred of his aristocratic pride vanished. He dropped his hands from the gate and fell forward, pressing his forehead against the damp concrete. He began to babble, his words rushing out in a desperate, frantic torrent of self-preservation. "It was not my idea, Cassidy," he sobbed, pointing a shaking finger back at his mother. "They made me do it. Mom and Dad orchestrated the whole thing. They told me we would lose the estate if I did not sign those papers. They pressured me every single day. They said you would not understand the business. I was just following their orders. I am a victim here too." Patricia let out a strangled shriek of pure betrayal. "You miserable coward!" she screamed at her son, taking an aggressive step toward him with her hands balled into fists. "How dare you blame your father and me? We gave you everything, you ungrateful little brat. We built this empire for you." Cassidy let out a sharp, humorless laugh that stopped them both in their tracks. The sound cut through the misty air, silencing the bickering mother and son. "Listen to yourself, Liam," Cassidy said, stepping right up to the iron bars and looking down at him with absolute disgust. "Look at the pathetic man you truly are. You are 32 years old, and you are still hiding behind your mother's skirt, throwing her under the bus the second you face a real consequence. You were not pressured. You were a willing, enthusiastic participant because you wanted the millions without ever having to work a single honest day in your life." Liam looked up, his face streaked with dirt and tears, holding his hands out in supplication. "I love you, Cassidy. I swear to God, I love you. You love the comfort I provided." Cassidy fired back, her voice rising with a ferocious, undeniable power. "You loved that I kept this family afloat while you played the wealthy, untouchable playboy. When things got hard, you did not step up. You plotted to leave me bleeding in a public hospital ward and steal the very money meant to protect your own child." She looked at him with absolute finality, her expression turning to stone. "You chose a vacation over your child's birth, Liam. Now you get a permanent vacation from our lives." Liam let out a gut-wrenching wail, reaching his hands through the bars in a futile attempt to grasp the hem of her trousers. Cassidy did not flinch. She simply reached into her pocket and pulled out a small black remote control. She pressed the silver button in the center. Instantly, the wail of police sirens pierced the quiet neighborhood. The sound bounced off the surrounding mansions, growing louder and more urgent by the second. Patricia spun around, her eyes darting wildly down the street as panic set in. "You called the police!" Patricia shrieked, grabbing her designer purse and backing away from the gate. "We are standing on a public sidewalk. We have a legal right to be here. You cannot have us arrested for trespassing, you vindictive little witch." Cassidy smiled a cold, calculating smile. "I did not call them for trespassing, Patricia." Two local police cruisers came skidding around the corner, their red and blue lights flashing violently against the manicured hedges. They pulled into the cul-de-sac, blocking the exit entirely. But they did not stop in front of Patricia or Liam. At that exact moment, a battered yellow taxi screeched to a halt right behind the cruisers. The rear door flew open, and Terrence tumbled out onto the pavement. He had taken a separate cab from the airport, hoping to quickly secure a hidden safety deposit box at a local bank before joining the rest of his family at the estate. He looked completely frantic, his tie undone, his shirt stained with sweat, and his eyes darting around like a cornered animal. The police officers bypassed Patricia entirely. They drew their weapons and marched straight toward Terrence. Terrence froze his eyes, darting frantically between the approaching officers and the massive iron gate. He raised his hands, his expensive cashmere overcoat slipping off one shoulder. "Officers, there has been a mistake," he stammered, flashing a desperate synthetic smile. "I just arrived from the airport. I am out on bail. I have not violated any parameters of my release. You have absolutely no jurisdiction to harass me on a public street. You violated your bail conditions the second you landed at SeaTac," the lead officer stated, closing the distance and grabbing Terrence roughly by the shoulder. "You are prohibited from accessing any international financial networks or contacting any co-conspirators. We have the digital logs. You purchased a prepaid cellular device at an airport kiosk 30 minutes ago and immediately initiated an encrypted call to a Miss Chloe Kensington in Miami, instructing her to liquidate the secondary offshore accounts." Terrence turned pale. His mouth hung open, but no sound came out. He looked around wildly as if expecting a loophole to materialize in thin air. How could they possibly know that? He had used a ghost protocol he bought from a dark web broker. It was supposed to be completely untraceable. "I forwarded the specific encrypted routing packets directly to the federal task force," Cassidy announced, her voice slicing through the cold morning mist. Terrence whipped his head toward the gate. Cassidy stood there, her posture radiating absolute control. "While you were busy hiding cash for your mistress in South Beach, I was busy auditing your entire ghost network." Cassidy continued, her tone dripping with surgical precision. "I knew you would panic the moment your primary accounts were seized in New York. I knew you would try to reach Chloe to secure your escape fund. I gave the authorities the exact digital signature of your hidden ledger weeks ago. The moment you logged in, you triggered an automatic alert. You did not just violate your bail, Terrence. You hand-wrapped your own federal indictment." The Wall Street titan completely unraveled, his arrogant facade shattered, leaving behind a terrified, hyperventilating coward. As the officer violently twisted his arms behind his back, the sharp metallic click of handcuffs echoed in the quiet cul-de-sac. Terrence thrashed wildly, his eyes locking onto his wife, who stood trembling on the sidewalk. "Rebecca," he pleaded, his voice cracking into a high-pitched whine. "Rebecca, you have to call your father's crisis team. Call Arthur in Seattle. Have him wire the emergency retainer. They cannot lock me up. I will not survive in federal holding. Do something." Rebecca stood perfectly still. The pristine socialite looked hollowed out. Her designer clothes were stained and wrinkled from the agonizing cross-country flight, and her eyes were completely dead. She stared at the man she had married, the man who had secretly funneled millions of her family's stolen wealth to fund a lavish lifestyle for a mistress while constantly belittling her own intelligence. She walked slowly toward him, stopping just inches from where the police officers held him, pinned against the cruiser. "Rebecca, please." Terrence begged, tears of panic streaming down his cheeks. Rebecca looked him up and down with an expression of pure, concentrated revulsion. She gathered the saliva in her mouth and spat directly onto his custom-imported Italian leather shoes. "Rot in a cell, you pathetic parasite," she hissed, her voice vibrating with raw hatred. "You are nothing but a thief who got caught. I hope they throw away the key." "Get him out of here," the lead officer ordered. They shoved Terrence's head down and forced him into the back of the police cruiser, slamming the door shut with a heavy thud. The engine roared to life, and the cruiser sped away down the affluent street, taking the last remnants of Terrence's hollow empire with it. Richard watched the taillights disappear into the morning fog. For decades, he had been the untouchable kingmaker of the Blackwell family. He had bought politicians, intimidated rivals, and built a financial dynasty on a foundation of ruthless exploitation. He had always believed he was the smartest man in any room. Suddenly, a crushing, invisible weight slammed into his chest. Richard staggered backward, his hands flying to his throat. He gasped for air, but his lungs refused to expand. The reality of his situation finally breached his massive ego. He had no money. He had no lawyers. His properties were seized. His son-in-law was returning to federal custody, and his own son was weeping on the pavement. Richard looked up at the towering stone mansion that had been his crown jewel. He saw Cassidy standing behind the gate, looking down at him not with anger, but with clinical indifference. He realized in a terrifying flash of clarity that he was never going to set foot in a boardroom again. He was going to stand trial as a broke, exposed fraud. He was going to die in a federal penitentiary. His knees buckled, and the great Richard Blackwell collapsed onto the wet curb, clutching his chest as a severe panic attack consumed his nervous system. Patricia watched her husband fall, her mind already fractured by the public humiliation and the loss of her absolute authority, completely snapped. The sight of her powerful husband writhing on the sidewalk and her son groveling in the dirt broke the final thread of her sanity. She whipped her head toward the gate, her eyes locked onto Cassidy. The calm, collected woman holding the baby represented everything Patricia had lost. Cassidy had dismantled her world with terrifying precision, and she was standing there looking completely untouched. "You," Patricia screamed, a sound so feral and unhinged it barely sounded human. "You did this to us. You ruined my family." Patricia lunged forward. She threw her body against the 10-foot wrought iron gate, grabbing the cold metal bars with her bare hands. She began to climb her expensive leather heels, scraping frantically against the ornate ironwork. She looked like a wild animal, desperate to tear Cassidy apart with her bare hands. Cassidy did not even take a step back. She simply watched the deranged woman struggle. "Give me my house!" Patricia shrieked, spit flying from her lips as she hauled herself 2 feet off the ground. "I will kill you. I will tear you to pieces." The morning mist had left the iron bars slick with condensation. Patricia shifted her weight, trying to reach a higher foothold. Her expensive heel slipped off the wet metal. She lost her grip entirely. With a breathless shriek, Patricia plummeted backward. She missed the concrete sidewalk and crashed hard into the freshly tilled landscaping bed bordering the driveway. She landed squarely on her back in a thick pool of wet, dark mud. The filthy sludge splattered violently, coating her face, her hair, and her pristine Chanel suit. Patricia thrashed wildly in the muck, screaming incoherently as the cold mud seeped into her expensive silk blouse, completely ruining the last physical symbol of her wealth and status. Cassidy stood perfectly still behind the heavy iron bars, watching Patricia thrash in the dark mud. The former matriarch of the Blackwell dynasty was screaming incoherently, her face smeared with dirt, and her expensive silk blouse ruined beyond repair. Sirens blared in the background as police officers wrestled Terrence into the back of a squad car, while paramedics rushed toward Richard, who was still clutching his chest on the pavement. Liam remained frozen on his knees, weeping into his hands. Cassidy did not smile. She did not gloat. She simply turned her back on the pathetic scene. She adjusted the cashmere blanket around her sleeping daughter and walked slowly up the sweeping driveway. Her heels clicked rhythmically against the stone path. She pulled open the massive oak front doors and stepped inside. As the heavy doors clicked shut behind her, the chaotic noise of the street was instantly severed. Total, absolute silence filled the grand foyer. She walked through the immaculate hallways of the estate that now belonged entirely to her. She stepped into the sprawling kitchen and opened the custom refrigerator, taking out a chilled bottle of premium sparkling cider. She poured a generous measure into a crystal flute. Carrying the glass, she walked up the grand staircase and entered the nursery. The room was bathed in soft, warm light. She gently placed her daughter into the pristine crib, pulling a soft quilt over the tiny sleeping form. Cassidy sat in the plush rocking chair nearby, taking a slow sip of the crisp cider. She watched her baby's chest rise and fall in a steady, peaceful rhythm. The threat was neutralized. The monsters were locked outside the gates. Her daughter was safe and their future was entirely secure. 3 months later, the damp Seattle winter had set in completely. A sea of reporters and news vans surrounded the federal courthouse in downtown Seattle. The Blackwell corruption trial had become the media spectacle of the decade. Dozens of camera flashes illuminated the gray morning as Cassidy stepped out of a black town car. She was flanked by 2 federal prosecutors and a security detail. She wore a sharply tailored navy blue suit, her hair pulled back into a sleek professional style. Reporters shouted questions about the seized assets and the offshore accounts, but she completely ignored them, walking up the marble steps with absolute authority. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere was suffocatingly tense. The heavy mahogany walls seemed to close in around the defense table. Cassidy took her seat at the front of the gallery and let her eyes drift toward the people who had once treated her like disposable garbage. The transformation was staggering. The untouchable Blackwell family looked broken, aged, and entirely defeated. Liam sat slumped in his wooden chair. His hair was visibly thinning, and he was wearing a cheap, poorly fitted polyester suit that bunched awkwardly at his shoulders. Without access to his trust funds or his high-end tailors, he looked like exactly what he was, an unremarkable coward. Beside him, Richard sat hunched over an oxygen tank, his face gray and hollowed out. The illusion of his powerful empire had been entirely shattered the moment the FBI raided his corporate headquarters. He knew with absolute certainty that he was going to die in a federal prison. Patricia sat rigidly at the end of the table. Stripped of her expensive salon treatments, her fillers, and her designer wardrobe, she looked decades older. She wore a dull gray blazer that washed out her complexion, and her eyes darted around the room with paranoid, manic energy. The bailiff called Cassidy to the witness stand. She stood up, smoothed her jacket, and walked deliberately across the room. She placed her hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, and took her seat. She looked directly at the jury, projecting absolute competence and unwavering confidence. For the next 4 hours, Cassidy served as the star expert witness for the prosecution. Under the gentle guidance of the lead prosecutor, she systematically dismantled the Blackwell financial empire. She did not use emotional language. She used cold, hard facts. She projected complex spreadsheets onto the courtroom monitors, breaking down the offshore shell companies, the Cayman Island routing numbers, and the fraudulent tax filings. She explained how Richard and Terrence had systematically embezzled millions from their own corporate clients, while Liam actively forged signatures to move the stolen funds across international borders. The jury hung on her every word, captivated by her intelligence and her precise surgical delivery. Patricia glared at her from the defense table, her hands shaking with suppressed rage. When the prosecution finally rested, the lead defense attorney stood up. Mr. Sterling was a slick, desperate man who had clearly been hired with whatever small funds the Blackwells had left hidden. He aggressively buttoned his suit jacket and paced toward the witness stand. He knew he could not dispute the hard financial evidence, so he immediately pivoted to attacking her character. Miss Cassidy Sterling began, his voice dripping with condescension. You expect this jury to believe you are some kind of financial mastermind. But let us look at the facts. You were working as a receptionist when my client Liam Blackwell found you. He gave you a life of luxury. He brought you into high society. And when your marriage hit a rough patch, you suddenly orchestrate this massive federal investigation. Cassidy rested her hands in her lap, keeping her face entirely neutral. I simply provided the authorities with the truth, Mr. Sterling. The truth, Sterling mocked, turning to face the jury with a theatrical sigh. Or is this just a vindictive fairy tale? You were angry that your wealthy husband wanted a divorce. You realized you would lose your mansion, your cars, and your credit cards. So you fabricated this entire financial narrative to steal my client's ancestral home. You are not a whistleblower. You are just a bitter, scorned wife seeking revenge because you wanted the Blackwell fortune all to yourself. The courtroom held its breath. Liam looked up, a tiny spark of desperate hope flashing in his eyes. Patricia nodded vigorously in her seat. Cassidy did not flinch. She did not raise her voice or show a single ounce of intimidation. Instead, a slow, terrifyingly calm smile spread across her face. I am not a scorned wife, Mr. Sterling, Cassidy replied, her voice ringing with crystal clarity across the silent room. I am a woman who pays very close attention to detail. And if you believe I fabricated this narrative out of thin air, you should probably review the final piece of evidence I submitted to the prosecution this morning. Cassidy calmly reached into the interior pocket of her navy blazer and pulled out a small silver digital storage drive. Cassidy held the small silver digital storage drive between her fingers, holding it up for the entire courtroom to see. I handed a copy of this drive to the federal prosecutors this morning, she stated, her voice echoing off the high mahogany walls. I found it hidden behind a firewall on Richard Blackwell's private server while I was executing the audit of my grandfather's estate. The lead prosecutor took the drive and plugged it directly into the courtroom evidence system. A massive spreadsheet illuminated the three large monitors positioned around the room. The documents were not just standard ledgers. They were signed contracts, wire transfer authorizations, and internal balance sheets bearing the explicit, undeniable signatures of Liam Blackwell and Richard Blackwell. These documents prove that the Blackwells did not just steal from my family, Cassidy explained, turning to face the jury. They were running a massive multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme. They systematically defrauded hundreds of elderly investors to prop up their failing corporate ventures and to fund their own lavish lifestyles. If you look at the names on that ledger, you will see that they targeted the pensions and retirement accounts of their own closest friends, the very people they dined with at the Oak Ridge Country Club. A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the courtroom, then a collective, unified gasp erupted from the gallery. The wooden benches were packed tightly with those exact country club members, prominent Seattle socialites and retired executives who had trusted Richard Blackwell with their life savings. At the defense table, Mr. Sterling stared blankly at the glowing monitors. He slowly lowered his hands and dropped his expensive fountain pen onto the wooden desk. The sharp clatter of the metal pen hitting the wood echoed loudly. He knew instantly that the case was completely unwinnable. He pushed his chair back, creating a physical distance between himself and his clients. Patricia Blackwell buried her face in her hands. Her shoulders began to shake with violent, ugly sobs as the reality of her total social and financial annihilation set in. The people in the gallery, the same people who used to attend her lavish charity galas, began to mutter curses and vile insults directed right at the defense table. The crushing pressure in the room finally broke Liam. He stared at his own signature projected on the screen, his eyes wide with absolute terror. He shot up from his chair, knocking it backward onto the floor with a loud crash. "It was them," Liam screamed, pointing a shaking, frantic finger directly at his mother and father. "I did not want to do it. They made me." The courtroom erupted into total chaos, but Liam's panicked voice cut right through the noise. He wept openly, confessing to everything right there on the spot. He admitted to stealing the trust money. He admitted to running the fraudulent wire transfers from the hotel in New York. He sobbed uncontrollably, begging the jury to understand that his parents had forced him into the family scheme. He confessed to abandoning his wife in a public hospital just to secure the offshore accounts before the feds could notice. He threw away every last ounce of his dignity trying to save himself by throwing his family straight into the fire. The judge struck his heavy wooden gavel repeatedly against the sound block. The sharp, violent cracks echoed like gunshots until the room fell into a terrified, breathless silence. The judge looked down at the defense table with an expression of profound physical disgust. "I have heard absolutely enough," the judge stated, his voice vibrating with anger. "Given the overwhelming evidence and the spontaneous confession in my courtroom, I am prepared to deliver a swift and merciless sentence immediately." He looked directly at the former patriarch of the family. "Richard Blackwell, you have orchestrated a financial deception of monstrous proportions, ruining the lives of those who trusted you most. I sentence you to 15 years in federal prison without the possibility of early parole." Richard slumped forward, gripping his oxygen tank as if he had been physically struck. "Patricia Blackwell." The judge continued, his gaze moving to the weeping woman. "For your role in this massive conspiracy and your active participation in hiding these stolen funds, I sentence you to 10 years in federal prison." The bailiffs then brought Terrence forward. He was already wearing a bright orange prison jumpsuit, his hands shackled to his waist. "Terrence Blackwell, for your part in the international wire fraud and your blatant violation of federal bail conditions, you are sentenced to 12 years. Finally, the judge turned his cold, unyielding gaze to Liam. "Liam Blackwell, you are sentenced to 5 years in a federal penitentiary, and you are ordered to pay millions of dollars in mandatory restitution." The judge leaned forward, resting his hands on the high wooden bench. "While your financial crimes are severe, your personal conduct is entirely reprehensible. The heinous act of deliberately abandoning your pregnant wife in a hospital room to fly across the country and commit wire fraud is a level of moral bankruptcy I have rarely seen in my courtroom. You are a disgrace." The bailiff stepped forward with heavy metal handcuffs. They secured the wrists of the once untouchable Blackwell family, yanking their arms behind their backs. As the guards aggressively pulled them away toward the holding cells, Liam dragged his feet. He turned his head and looked back at Cassidy one last time. Tears streamed down his ruined face, making him look incredibly pathetic. He mouthed the words sorry. Cassidy did not blink. She did not show a single trace of emotion. She simply turned her back on him and began packing up her files. 10 minutes later, Cassidy stepped out through the heavy brass doors of the federal courthouse and into the crisp afternoon air. She took a deep breath, feeling a profound, absolute sense of freedom. The empire that had tried to crush her was gone. But as she walked down the wide concrete steps, a figure stepped out from behind a marble pillar, blocking her path. It was Rebecca. Cassidy paused, taking in the sight before her. The former pristine socialite looked entirely destitute. She was wearing a cheap, grease-stained uniform from a local fast food restaurant. Her hair was unwashed, hanging in limp strands around her pale face, and her hands were trembling violently in the cold air. Rebecca looked at Cassidy with desperate, hollow eyes. "Cassidy, please," Rebecca whispered, her voice cracking with humiliation. "I have absolutely nothing left. Terrence took everything before they froze the accounts. Please, I just need a loan to survive the week." Cassidy looked down at the woman who had spent years mocking her existence. Rebecca had once sneered at Cassidy's clothes, her background, and her intelligence. Now the golden child of high society stood shivering on the cold pavement, wearing a grease-stained uniform that smelled faintly of old frying oil. Her designer handbags and custom shoes were gone, replaced by cheap, scuffed sneakers and a desperate, pleading expression. Cassidy felt no anger. She felt no desire to gloat or scream. The absolute destruction of the Blackwell Empire was satisfaction enough. Cassidy calmly reached into her pristine leather handbag. She bypassed her checkbook and pulled out 2 crisp, white business cards. She handed them to the trembling woman. "One is for a highly rated women's shelter in the city." Cassidy stated, her tone perfectly flat and clinical. "The other is the direct line for the public defender's office. Learn to work for a living, Rebecca." "I did." Rebecca stared at the small paper cards as if they were venomous snakes, her mouth opening and closing soundlessly. Cassidy did not wait for a response or a thank you. She stepped neatly around the broken woman and continued her descent down the wide concrete steps. A swarm of reporters immediately descended upon her. Camera shutters fired rapidly, blindingly bright against the gray Seattle afternoon. Microphones were thrust into her path as journalists shouted praises for her brilliant financial audit and her flawless courtroom testimony. They begged for a quote, asking how a single woman had managed to unearth a fraudulent offshore network that had baffled seasoned federal regulators for over a decade. Cassidy ignored every single one of them. She kept her gaze forward, her posture immaculate, and her expression entirely unbothered. A heavy black SUV idled at the curb, its rear door held open by a private security guard. She slid into the plush leather interior, and the door slammed shut instantly, cutting off the frantic shouts of the press. Inside the quiet sanctuary of the vehicle, the scent of fresh lilies and warm milk filled the air. Cassidy let out a long breath, relaxing her tense shoulders for the first time all day. Sitting across from her was Maya, her closest colleague and fiercely loyal best friend, who had stood by her side through every grueling month of the pregnancy and the complex investigation. Maya smiled warmly, bouncing Cassidy's giggling baby daughter on her knee. "You did it," Maya said softly, handing the baby over. "It is finally over. They are gone." Cassidy took her daughter, breathing in the sweet, familiar scent of her hair. "We did it," she corrected, bouncing the baby gently. The SUV pulled away from the curb, merging into the heavy traffic and heading straight for the sprawling stone mansion that was now safely and legally theirs. As the vehicle navigated the winding roads toward the estate, Cassidy felt her phone vibrate in her blazer pocket. She pulled it out and tapped the screen. It was an urgent, heavily encrypted email sent directly from the director of the Internal Revenue Service. Cassidy read the text, her eyes widening slightly at the magnitude of the message. The director was not just congratulating her on securing the historic conviction. The email contained a formal offer for a massive career elevation. She was being promoted to lead her own national task force operating with full federal clearance to hunt down high-level corporate fraud across the entire country. She locked the screen and tucked the phone away, a genuine radiant smile finally reaching her eyes. Exactly 1 year later, the sprawling manicured gardens of the Blackwell estate were completely unrecognizable. The oppressive, sterile atmosphere that Patricia had meticulously maintained for decades had been entirely scrubbed away. In its place was vibrant, joyous life. Cassidy was hosting her daughter's first birthday party. Brightly colored paper lanterns hung from the ancient oak trees, casting a warm golden glow over the immaculate lawns. Soft acoustic music played from hidden speakers while children chased each other through the lush grass. Long wooden tables were draped in crisp white linens and piled high with catered food, fresh flowers, and towering tiers of custom desserts. The guests filling the garden were a stark, absolute contrast to the hollow, status-obsessed sycophants who used to haunt the property. There were no country club snobs making passive-aggressive comments about net worth or lineage. There was no walking on eggshells to appease fragile, wealthy egos. Instead, the garden was packed with genuine friends, supportive colleagues from the new federal task force, and a true chosen family who loved Cassidy and her daughter unconditionally. Maya was currently organizing a chaotic game of tag on the lawn, laughing loudly as she dodged a group of energetic toddlers. Cassidy stood near the dessert table pouring a glass of sparkling water. Two of her senior federal investigators approached holding plates piled high with barbecue. "I just read the latest federal penitentiary reports. One of the agents mentioned taking a bite of a pastry. You will never guess who submitted an official formal complaint about his daily work detail." Cassidy raised an eyebrow, taking a slow sip of water. "Let me guess. Liam." The agent laughed, nodding vigorously. "He is mopping floors in the prison cafeteria. He filed a 60-page grievance claiming the harsh industrial chemicals are ruining his hands and causing him emotional distress. The warden denied it immediately. He has 4 more years of cafeteria sanitation duty ahead of him." The other investigator chimed in, shaking his head with a smirk. "It is pure poetic justice. I heard from the Financial Crimes Division that Terrence is currently assigned to the prison laundry folding heavy canvas sheets for 12 cents an hour. And Patricia has officially alienated everyone in her maximum security cell block. She tried to order the other inmates around like they were her personal household staff. They isolated her completely. She spends 23 hours a day sitting on her cot, talking to herself about her lost social status." Cassidy looked out over her beautiful, thriving garden. She felt no pity for any of them. They had built their own cages, brick by greedy brick. As the sun began to set, painting the Seattle sky in brilliant shades of orange and deep purple, the heavy iron gates at the front of the driveway swung open. Cassidy turned to see her lead attorney walking up the stone path. He was not dressed for a casual birthday party. He wore a sharp charcoal suit and carried a thick manila envelope in his hands. Wrapped tightly around the center of the envelope was a bright crimson ribbon tied in a neat, deliberate bow. He caught Cassidy's eye from across the lawn and gave a solemn, highly serious nod. He bypassed the food tables and the laughing guests, walking directly toward her. Cassidy set her glass down on the table, her pulse quickening in her chest. She knew exactly what that red ribbon meant. Cassidy reached out and took the heavy manila envelope from her attorney. The bright crimson ribbon felt smooth against her fingers as she pulled the neat bow apart, letting the silk material flutter to the grass. She opened the flap and slid out the thick stack of premium watermarked paper. It was an official certified notice from the Federal Banking Authority. The numbers printed on the summary page were staggering. Her grandfather's original trust fund, the very money Liam and his family had callously drained to fuel their fraudulent empire, had been completely restored. Every single stolen cent was back in her name, but it did not stop there. The document detailed years of compounded interest that the court had rigorously calculated and legally enforced. Below the trust restoration was a separate section outlining the final execution of the federal court order regarding punitive damages. The government had aggressively liquidated every remaining hidden asset tied to Richard Patricia and Terrence Blackwell. Their secret offshore holding companies, their luxury yachts, their overseas penthouses, and their illicit real estate investments had all been seized and sold by federal authorities. The court had awarded Cassidy a massive percentage of those liquidated funds as direct compensation for the extreme emotional and financial distress she had endured. The Blackwell family had been entirely stripped of their wealth, and the remnants of their shattered dynasty now sat legally and permanently in Cassidy's name. She looked up at her attorney, who was watching her with a quiet, respectful smile. He reached into his suit jacket and produced a sleek silver pen. "Everything is finalized," he said, his voice carrying clearly over the soft music playing in the garden. "The transfers cleared this morning. We just need your signature to lock the new structure into place." Cassidy gestured to a small wrought iron table near the edge of the patio. They sat down together away from the bustling party guests. Her attorney laid out the final customized trust documents they had spent months drafting. This was not a standard financial arrangement. It was an ironclad, impenetrable legal fortress built specifically for her daughter. Cassidy read through the clauses she had personally insisted upon. The funds were locked tight. No future spouse, no distant relative, and certainly no one carrying the Blackwell name would ever be able to access, manipulate, or siphon a single dollar from her child. The trust was designed to provide education security and ultimate freedom, but it was structured to prevent the kind of lazy, toxic entitlement that had poisoned Liam and his family. The money would be distributed in staggered, carefully managed increments tied to specific life milestones, rather than handed over as a blank check. Cassidy took the silver pen and signed her name on the dotted line. The ink flowed smoothly across the page, binding her daughter's future in absolute, unshakable security. She handed the pen back to her attorney, feeling a profound physical weight lift from her shoulders. The generational curse was officially broken. She thanked him, instructing him to grab a plate of food and enjoy the celebration before she turned and walked toward the house. She stepped through the wide glass French doors and entered the mansion. The transformation of the physical space was a direct reflection of her own internal rebirth. When Patricia ruled this estate, it had been a cold, sterile museum designed only to intimidate guests and project a fake aura of superiority. The walls had been painted in drab, oppressive tones, and the furniture was stiff and unwelcoming. Cassidy had torn all of that away. She had knocked down the heavy, restrictive drapes to let natural sunlight flood through the massive windows. The dark, suffocating wallpaper had been replaced with warm, bright colors. The intimidating antique statues had been cleared out, making room for comfortable, oversized sofas and vibrant modern art that actually brought joy to the room, too. As she walked through the grand hallway, the sound of children laughing echoed off the walls. Several of her colleagues' kids were playing a game of hide-and-seek, darting behind the plush new furniture and giggling uncontrollably. A few parents stood in the open kitchen pouring drinks and chatting casually. There was no toxic drama. There were no hushed, passive-aggressive conversations happening in the corners. No one was walking on eggshells trying to appease a fragile, wealthy ego. The house was alive, vibrating with genuine warmth and authentic happiness. Cassidy walked up the sweeping staircase and into the nursery, where Maya was gently bouncing the birthday girl on her hip. Cassidy smiled, taking her daughter into her arms and inhaling the sweet, familiar scent of baby lotion. She carried her baby back downstairs and walked into the grand living room, stepping up to the massive floor-to-ceiling picture window. Cassidy held her daughter close to her chest, feeling the steady, comforting warmth of the small body against her own. She stood before the massive floor-to-ceiling window of the master suite, looking out over the sprawling green lawns of the estate and the towering Seattle skyline glittering in the distance. The city lights sparkled like scattered diamonds against the darkening sky. Exactly 1 year ago, that same skyline had felt like a suffocating cage of glass and steel. Back then, she was just a terrified pregnant woman holding a positive test in a cramped apartment, completely paralyzed by the overwhelming shadow of a billionaire family that demanded absolute submission. She looked down at the official bank notice resting on the small wrought iron table beside her. $70 million. Punitive damages, the historic mansion, the total liquidation of her abusers. It was an undeniable historic victory. Yet as she stared out at the city, Cassidy realized something profound. The money was just math. The prison sentences were just legal mechanics. The mansion was just stone and glass. The greatest revenge she had achieved was not the total physical and financial destruction of the Blackwell empire. It was not seeing Richard gasp for air in a courtroom or watching Liam being led away in heavy metal handcuffs. The true absolute victory was the profound silence in her own mind. For years, Patricia's mocking voice had lived inside her head, dictating her worth, critiquing her clothes, her background, and her very existence. Richard's booming authoritative threats had echoed in her subconscious, making her second-guess every instinct. Liam's cowardly, manipulative gaslighting had constantly warped her sense of reality. They had occupied her mind rent-free, an oppressive psychological occupation that drained her spirit daily. Now that space was completely empty of their poison, their voices were gone, entirely replaced by the quiet, steady rhythm of her own breathing and the soft, peaceful coos of her child. She had evicted the Blackwells not just from their ancestral home, but from her reality and her psyche. They had absolutely no power over her thoughts anymore. Cassidy thought about the labels they had violently forced upon her: the lowly tax clerk, the opportunistic gold digger, the desperate charity case, the obedient disposable wife. She let those words wash over her one final time, feeling absolutely nothing but a faint clinical amusement. They had drastically, severely underestimated her. She was no longer any of those things. She was Cassidy. She was a powerhouse federal agent about to launch a national task force with full government clearance to hunt down elite corporate predators. She was the sole owner of a sprawling historic estate. She was a self-made millionaire who had reclaimed her grandfather's stolen legacy with surgical precision. But above all, she was a fiercely protective mother who had literally moved mountains and destroyed a corrupt dynasty to ensure her daughter would never know the taste of fear or the sting of being made to feel inferior. Down below, the garden party continued in full swing. The soft melody of a live acoustic guitar floated up through the open glass doors, mingling with the genuine warm laughter of her chosen family. Maya was down there, likely intercepting a tray of appetizers and organizing the next children's game. The federal prosecutors were trading light-hearted stories by the catered buffet. There were no fake smiles. There were no transactional handshakes or toxic power plays. It was a space built entirely on authenticity and mutual respect. She had burned down a poisonous empire and planted a thriving, beautiful garden in its ashes. In her arms, the baby stirred. The little girl blinked her bright, intelligent eyes and let out a sudden, bubbling laugh. She reached up with a tiny, warm hand and pressed her palm flat against Cassidy's cheek. The simple, pure innocence of the gesture grounded Cassidy entirely in the present moment. A smile broke across her face. It was not the tight, practiced smile she had used to survive agonizing country club dinners, nor the cold, calculated smirk she had worn on the witness stand in the federal courtroom. It was a genuine, completely unburdened, and entirely radiant smile. The heavy armor she had worn for the past year finally melted away, leaving only peace in its wake. Cassidy shifted her gaze from her daughter to the massive glass window. The warm interior lights of the mansion caught her reflection against the dark backdrop of the Seattle night. She did not see a victim. She did not see a survivor. She saw a conqueror. She reached over to the table and picked up her crystal flute of sparkling cider. She raised the glass slowly toward her own reflection, acknowledging the brilliant, relentless woman staring back at her. The monsters were locked away, the fortune was secured, and the future belonged entirely to them. "We are the architects of our own empire," Cassidy whispered to her daughter, her voice steady and vibrating with absolute peace. She took a slow sip of the crisp cider as the warm lights of the mansion glowed around them. She was secure, untouchable, and finally home. The screen fades to black on her triumphant, peaceful face.
I used to ride upon your shoulders, thinking you could touch the sky. Every road felt less uncertain when I saw the world through your eyes. You were stronger than the mountains, taller than the northern pines. And when the winter winds were coming, you would stand between them and I. Time kept moving like the river, years slipped slowly out to sea. But no matter where life took me, you were always part of me. I am my father's daughter, in every step I take, in every time I choose to stand. When it's easier to break, I carry your courage in my heart, your fire inside my soul. And though the years keep moving on, your love still leads me home. You taught me strength is not in power, but in kindness when it's hard. You taught me how to keep on going when the road grows cold and dark. Every lesson, every story, every laugh around the flame lies within me like an echo, calling softly through my name. And when I face my greatest battles, when I feel I can't go on, I can hear your voice beside me saying, child, you're stronger than you know. I am my father's daughter, in every step I take, in every time I choose to stand. When it's easier to break, I carry your courage in my heart, your fire inside my soul. And though the years keep moving on, your love still leads me home. One day the snow will cover footprints, one day the fire will burn low. But the things a father gives his daughter are the things that never go. Not the gold or not the stories, not the battles that he won, but the quiet way he loved her and the woman she becomes. I am my father's daughter, and I always will remain through every triumph